Welcome to AI and Automation in Action, where we show business leaders how to turn AI from a buzzword into measurable operational leverage. If you're serious about operational efficiency and responsible AI adoption, you're in the right place.
Well, hey there, Hunter, and welcome back to another edition of AI and Automation in Action, where we dive into real-world use cases of AI and automation. It's been a few weeks since Hunter and I have been able to connect, so I'm excited to connect with you, Hunter, and talk through probably one of the larger builds that we've developed so far this year anyway. And some of the functionality is just amazing that we've been able to help bring to life for this client. So I'll kind of tee this up in terms of the client overview, and then I'll allow you to kind of jump in and give some more details. So we had a client come to us, someone that we've actually been working with for quite a while. They're in the sales field and extremely sharp when it comes to the overall sales process. And one of the challenges they ran into was, they've got multiple clients all over the world. And in terms of coaching frameworks and getting consistency, even though they've got a lot of, intellectual property that helps them provide excellence in terms of consulting, getting that in the client's hands and helping them use it on a consistent basis was kind of the constraint there. So with that said, Hunter, you want to kind of tee us up for what the challenge they were having?
So what we were able to provide is when the client starts in the platform, it requires them to integrate with their existing CRM. So it's taking the deals, contacts, companies, and ingesting that automatically in the platform. From the deals that it's seen from your CRM, it's then starting at that initial stage, so the discovery. And from there, it will do a pre-intelligence or a pre-scan of that deal using AI and the frameworks that the client has provided. And it generates that output each time following that framework that he has created over the last 25 years. And so the output that it is generating each time is standardized. So, if he is unhappy with how that looks, he's able to go in the back end and tweak those or refine those further. But we've gotten them now to a point where he's very happy, and it's following how it sounds like he would provide that output if he was on the phone effectively.
I want to pause you there for just a minute because I want to make sure I, kind of dive into this. So the overall goal was in the sales process, everyone's going to follow a standardized sales methodology. There's many out there, but it comes down to following that same process, adhering to the standards that are there, and then analyzing how well you're performing against those. And so from what you're telling me is the first step was, hey, we need to be able to tie into the CRM and see what sales opportunities are even existing today, suck that in. And then the next step is kind of seeing, are we following the process, correct?
Correct. And driving them and forcing it through that process and those frameworks. So each time the output is following the same standardization.
Got you. So one of the things that we look at in this is there is a workflow that has to be followed, but then in terms of a sales, progression, we take sales calls. So the actual calls that are occurring between the salesperson and their prospect. So those live inside the CRM as well. So walk me through what you do with that.
So after that pre-intelligence, they're getting a list of information before they jump on that call. They then have that call, which drives those next steps. So after the call is recorded, they're taking that recorded call and uploading it to the platform, and it does a live transcription. And then from there, once it's done, it generates those next steps, which is the scorecard, scoring the call based upon the dimensions, again, following that framework that has been provided by the client over the last 25 years that they've been building. But once that scorecard has been generated, it scores each dimension, and then it follow up, it provides a coaching recommendation. So based upon everything that was scored, here is what you need to do and take to the next step of that sales framework, if you would, or the next step of this sale, I guess.
We go into the first step. We say, okay, what do we need to know about this opportunity? Can we get some intelligence around that? Then we have the sales call. We transcribe that, get the overall what happened, and it gives us, hey, here's what you did well. Here's what you may have missed. Here's how you scored in all these categories. And here's what we suggest you do as next steps. Okay. So, and in this particular sales methodology, I know that they have multiple steps, multiple sales calls. So from there, it tees up that next call. Is that correct?
Correct. So once it generates that coaching, it is effectively seeing that first step as complete. So it's moving the deal into that next stage, generating that pre-intelligence for the next call based upon what's already been done in the previous steps and teeing it up for this next stage, and then getting it ready and alerting the user in the platform that, hey, this deal is in this step. You are ready to make this call. And once the call has been done, you need to upload that transcript to feed the next scorecard and coaching steps in that stage.
Gotcha. And so as it moves to that next step, one of the things that I was really impressed with, because in sales, there a lot of times you miss items or don't get all the information you need, and people progress to the next step without following all of the steps. And what this platform could do is say, hey, you missed two critical items. Before you can go to this next step, you need to go back to the prospect and clarify these items. And so it's that check and balance that, hey, the process is being followed. How well did you do with it? And are there things that we need to remediate? And then it goes to that next step and we repeat that cycle again, right?
Correct. Yep. And to your point, it doesn't even allow them to move into that next stage until all of the items in that first stage have been complete or validated effectively. And that's what triggers that automatic move and drives the next stage to take action or be done.
And from there, like you say, it's a wash and repeat. So we've got the framework of what's supposed to happen in that next stage. It takes that call transcript, runs that process again against the standards, and gives feedback, coaching, next steps, and remediation items that have to be completed. One of the things that stood out to me really prominently in this process was in the sales, methodology. A lot of times a new person may get introduced into that sales process. So you may be meeting with the manager of a business in the first few conversations. And then when you get further down the line, an owner may get pulled into the mix. And one of the things that was very critical that I saw in this process was it can identify that, hey, there's been a new person added to this sales interaction, and it can redirect and say, before you can go on to the closing and presentation, you've got to go back and understand what this new person, what their buying criteria are, what is their role. And so that was one of the things that jumped out at me is like, this really fills the gap in terms of making sure a team follows process and making sure that we check off everything we need to before we progress. So let's talk about some of the other things that they wanted to accomplish with this. I know that they serve many clients, and so that was another added complexity, correct?
Correct. Yep. Having the ability for them to set up multiple clients that could integrate with multiple client CRMs, but also allow them the ability to manage all of those clients' environments from a MSP hierarchy, if you would.
Gotcha. And so, in the past, we've talked about sales automations that we've built, but they've been primarily internal use for an organization. Now, this is dealing with multiple clients. So you could have multiple people coming in giving data. And so inherently, that creates a security challenge. So, can you walk through what that was and how we overcome that?
So, in terms of when it comes to the AI prompts, the frameworks that were being used, of course, all of that is secured in the back end of its database, but we were able to pull in a few other tools that we leverage and incorporate guardrails when it comes to the AI prompts, how they're able to be interacted with, making sure what's fed in and the output that is given back is not exposing anything when it comes to the application itself, making sure when it comes to the import, making sure there's a job queue in place. So when users are, there may be a user on one tenant that's doing an import and a user on a different tenant that's doing an import, making sure that there's a queue in place so it doesn't crash the application like that, but also making sure that when it comes to signing into the application, two-factor authentication is enforced. Users are only able to access the application that they are allowed to when it comes to the clients. So for example, those platform admins that have access to all environments, they can see all environments, but when it comes to the users themselves only being able to see their data and not other clients' data.
And that's important because the sales organization does coaching. And so they've got their own team of people that get in and they need to be able to view all information from all clients. Whereas end users need to only be able to see, and you've got multiple layers there, right? Because you may have a sales manager at an organization that needs to see all of the information relative to their team, but then their team that's underneath them only needs to be able to see their individual information. So multiple layers of security. And I know from the database perspective, we put a lot of controls in place to make sure that that data cannot leak back and forth, which is kind of standard old school type of, hey, we need to secure the database. But then to your point, when you connect an AI LLM to this and you're feeding data back and forth, you have to ensure that that itself does not cross populate that data. So a lot of layers there.
Correct. Yep. And we leverage RBAC or role-based access control when it comes to those policies. We were able to provide a compliant solution when it comes to SOC 2 for that database as well. Another thing that we did not hit on, but something that I was really excited about when we put this platform together was the ability for each of the customers as well to customize those prompts. So not that it would differ too much from the scorecard or frameworks that the client has generated and worked over the years to provide, but they can go in and fine tune those even further to fit their needs. So maybe when it comes to when it's generating prospects and those lists, they can focus on specific organizations like manufacturing or whatever it may be, but they can narrow that in.
No, and that's incredible because while the sales framework may be consistent across, all the clients, every client's a little different because, every organization focuses on different industries or different constraints or compliance requirements. And so making sure that, for example, if we're an organization that sells to federal manufacturing that works under the CMMC guidelines, there's a whole different set of constraints that need to be applied and questions that are asked that feed into the sales process versus someone that sells to nonprofits that has to deal with, a board and public funding and things like that. So having that flexibility, this was a pretty large project. Can you give me an idea of how much time you and Eric from our team also worked on this? How much time do you guys feel like you invested over the course of the development?
I want to say over the entire development of this, we spent probably 200 to 250 hours, if I'm not mistaken, from bringing this from, again, the client's idea of having some of these frameworks to this full blown solution following what they had needed. And again, this has allowed them to now, whenever a client signs up, they can say, generate them a link, invite the client to the platform, and now they no longer have to sit on a call with the client to get those results, provide the frameworks, run through that. It can all be done within the application that we've provided, and those calls can now just be done strictly for check-ins. How are things going? How's the app working? Those kinds of things. So
You hit on a really important part to this because we always talk about the fact of, you can automate or leverage AI in almost any workflow process, but it's got to give you an ROI in terms of value. and it has to be tangible. I know with this organization, one of the biggest constraints that we see quite frequently in successful organizations is scaling. In terms of serving clients and growing rapidly, the number one constraint is hours, man hours, people hours. And so what this allowed them to do was, instead of having to, you can imagine if you're listening to an hour-long sales conversation, you can only do 8 to 12 of those, depending on how long a days you work in your organization. You can only do so many of those in a given day. But if you could take that and run this through this automation process where you're not listening to it real time, but you're still getting the value and the information out of it, it allowed his team to go from, having to, 8 or 10 per day that you could do, to now you could have hundreds per day. And now we've got real insights, we've got coaching data, we've got, metrics. And the other thing that I've touched on before as well is that this brings a non-biased perspective. You and I can have a conversation, and Hunter, I've known you for a long time, and I'm always going to try to be, I'm going to think through how is, I don't want to upset him, or I don't want to, tell him that you're not doing what you're supposed to do. This model allows it to be non-biased. It is,
Right.
does it meet the qualifications? If not, what are the requirements? And that allows a little more intimate discussion that someone can say, well, there's caveats here that doesn't get factored in, but here's how we take the highest value from this. And so in terms of the overall value of this project, I can see this being something that scales way beyond where they are today, offers up a whole new opportunity for multiple industries, things like that.
One other thing to your point too, is a centralized spot, having all of this data in one spot instead of back and forth emails, or maybe it's living under your CRM's deals, but still that's something that gets ingested in the platform. So having all of this in a centralized spot for your team to look at, or maybe your reps to look at for their own deals, was huge for them.
No, that's another huge point, that because they work with multiple clients that all use different systems, that again, we talk about this all the time, data being in silos that you can't get to. And so it simplifies that, it streamlines that, and provides a common management platform. So I know we've talked about this as a sales process, but this applies to any type of process. If you've got a manufacturing process that you want to make sure steps are being followed, being able to centralize that, make sure that the requirements are met before things can move along, applies to multiple industries, multiple workflow processes. And that's what I think is so exciting about what you've been able to build. You guys have done an incredible job. I know this is something that is only going to continue to grow and expand in terms of what it can do and who it can serve. So Hunter, as always, I love catching up with you. I love to see the work that you guys are doing, and always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you again for having me, Shane. Excited for the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to AI and Automation in Action. If today's conversation sparked ideas about how AI or automation could improve your operations, we'd love to continue that discussion with you. Join us next time as we showcase another real-world implementation and break down how to deploy AI responsibly and effectively. And if you want to brainstorm with our team, email us anytime at ideas@innovativeautomations.ai. Until next time.